and it ends up as 100% of nothing. And I think that's something we have to learn how to handle. So, you know, more talking about the principles would help this. People who have done it, tell us the process, you know, tell us how you negotiate this. What are good models? I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, I think we have just enough time to take another round, probably just the one round.
Sou arquiteto, sou presidente da Ordem dos Arquitetos de Cabo Verde. Queria felicitar os palestrantes pelas apresentações e queria aqui introduzir um tema que tem a ver com o território. Nós estamos a falar de parques, da concentração de serviços numa determinada área e nós, por exemplo, em Cabo Verde, portanto, somos ilhas e nós vivemos num mundo globalizado há muitos anos, desde a nossa existência, porque somos territórios fragmentados. Portanto, se imaginarmos uma tela, nós temos que funcionar a tela, digamos, no seu todo, mas a tela é partida por 9 partes. Nós temos que imaginar um conceito que permita que todos estejamos numa tela, mas em que nessa tela cada um pertence a uma determinada parte. Penso que a questão dos hubs, os clusters, a desterritorialização na alta tecnologia, penso que é motivo suficiente para pensarmos que isso tudo passa-se num território, em edifícios. Devemos sim concentrar as nossas ações em pessoas e as pessoas querem qualidade de vida. E o país, portanto, no seu todo, com as 9 partes, deve então beneficiar de um conceito que permita que nessas 9 partes, esses hubs, clusters, etc., possam então ter coesão territorial e vivermos todos com qualidade de vida. Muito obrigado.
Working on science parks, you should do it. What he did was, I had the chance to read the whole book, and I was extremely fascinated by the work he did. He went through the whole, you know, how the university system changed. And he took the whole industrial revolution, the 3 industrial revolutions. He took the American, the Japanese, the Korean, Scandinavian, and went specifically to South Africa and did thorough case study in the Western Cape of those universities, about 11 case studies, very seriously. What he did was, he said, how do we change universities from teaching and basic research to pure applied research, from applied basic research, pure basic research, and how different functions such as the third mission, commercialization, technology transfer offices, and industrial innovation, with the inclusion from the sector, from university, industry, government, civil society, and the various helices can be constructed. He actually did this in a very systematic way, and very detailed and very thorough. One of the best books I read last year was him. I think those studies, because they bring in all the cases that others have done, and what can be opened in our context, given our reality, by doing very specific case studies in a certain region, is an excellent study. So I would prefer that we don't just do models, but we actually do more specific, grounded, appreciated stuff, very from the ground, like you're trying to do, Deshi, from the ground up, Atulage, Mamelodi, you know something, then something new could come. I prefer that. At the same time, I'd like to all of you to know about Jenna. Can you, before you leave, can you talk about, please?
Thank you, Prof. And then the final comment. The big industries that Africa has a very important stake in, that there should be continental level collaboration to solve problems, and that area seems to have been relegated to international entities. And I was wondering how, just based on your study, what kind of activities are you seeing in that area, and what monetization industries that Africa has a very important stake in, that there should be continental level collaboration to solve problems, and that area seems to have been relegated to international entities. And I was wondering how, just based on your study, what kind of activities are you seeing in that area, and what monetization principles are coming out through that? Because we've seen that there's some indigenous solutions that are really fantastic, but they're not getting any light of that, any light on them. So I was just wondering if both of you can comment to the extent of some of the research and the work you've done. Thank you.
To be able to account for the importance of the territory and the betterment of the lives of people. And I would like to agree with that very, very strongly, because it is our responsibility, especially I feel particularly responsible as a researcher and an academic, to really contribute and try to develop better models that account for that. As an example, I would like to mention Brazil, for instance, and I think Brazil has taken the territorial aspect very much at heart, because of the internal diversity that exists between different provinces. You can really compare what happens in the Amazon with what happens in the south. So they pay a lot of attention to the importance of the territory and how that affects the different sort of local innovation systems. And as a collaboration between policymakers and the research community and other stakeholders, they've come out with this local innovation and production systems approach. It's a framework that looks at the territory in different ways. I mean, I'm not going to go into the details about that. If you want, I can give you references. But somehow they've managed to convey that message very clearly to the policymakers. And the Ministry for Regional Development has very much adopted that approach. And considering the territory as geographical areas that don't necessarily respond to provinces as such, but more territory defined in different ways. It can be a very small or very large, or a region defined by environmental similarities, resource similarities, and so on. And they managed to implement that to promote innovation in a very effective way. So I think it is possible. It is being done in different countries, and I think there needs to be a very close connection between evidence and policy making, which is been emphasized already, about the linking new methodologies and new frameworks, or relevant rather than new relevant frameworks to policy making when it comes to this. I'll take my Mamo's comment as an input that we will look into, and then the final comment on the role of collaboration within the continent, and if we found any sort of evidence on that in our study. In the narrative of the Innovation Hub in particular, which was the first recognized science park started in 2003 got recognition. But being the first recognized science park in Africa, it attracted a lot of attention, and probably Neville can comment on that better than I do, but it attracted a lot of attention and interest from different actors that in many other countries that had an interest in setting up a science park. So the Innovation Hub has been involved in consultations and sharing the experience with other African countries trying to do this. Now, I think the danger of that is that the lessons have to be received with critical eyes as well. So there needs to be sharing experience and learning from each other, but not presuming that you can just take that model and do it yourself in your country. So I think that collaboration and sharing experience across African countries has to be seen as a learning experience and looked at it with a critical eye and a very clear objective of tailoring that into your own context.
Could I just suggest that perhaps, I don't know if the lady meant it this way, but I thought she might also mean these hubs.
One item that has the potential for inclusion, and they were the people that we regard as internationally recognizing us. The interesting story was that I was the only person from Africa, and they tried to put us in two different regions because they didn't know what to do with us, so they suggested South America or Australia. And we suggested that actually we thought Africa was big enough to be noticed. About 3 years ago, an African region of the International Association of Science Parks has been formed. The present CEO of the Innovation Hub in Pretoria is the African president. And I think that organization needs support from across the continent. At the moment, I think the meetings, which happen about every second year, are more Southern Africa, and I think, you know, given the comments earlier from Algeria, there is a whole scope to get that conversation going. And I would just encourage people to look at becoming part of that process if you're thinking this way, because the amount of learning both continentally and across the world can be extremely valuable to help your thinking. The other factor is we haven't used that network to possibly discuss areas of mutual interest, and it could be a very interesting platform to facilitate that discussion. So I think for people to show an interest in that international association, I think it would strengthen it, and I think it would put us on a different platform to actually have ongoing discussions of this nature, but more focused on the actual, let's say, the examples that people are generating.
Okay. No, I think with that, we'd just like to start going towards the closing of the session. I'm sure entrepreneurs probably are the focus of this. Governments can help to drive, to capitalize, but their role also needs to be clear in terms of what they are doing in this space, and they probably cannot create what is not there. So this, I think, is quite an important point. The importance of consultation and engagement, but also negotiation, particularly when it comes to international interest and participation. So international can be important, but we have to be quite clear that we locate that, again, in terms of what is relevant for the particular initiative. We've also had some cautions that we probably need a lot more research in this space. There's a lot of variety. Probably the modes are not a formula that you are going to be A, B, and C, but that these generalized categories can at least help us on a conceptual level to understand what direction you might be heading. I think Neville even suggested they might be a progression, in fact, not necessarily that you locate yourself in A, B, and C. And so I think this presentation was very useful, perhaps for those of us who think or speak about a hub as though it is one kind of thing, or a park as though it is one kind of thing, to understand that there is this rich variety. And very importantly, I think the idea that as Africa, and in beginning to think about an African innovation system, probably we need to share a lot more within the continent, our battle scars, I think, as one of the speakers has said, that there are not just failures of whole things, but there are a lot of lessons that are coming out from those who are trying to do things, and probably in forums like this and through papers like this one, we can learn quite a bit from those who have been trying to do some of these things. I think with that, I would just like to thank very much again our panelists for their preparation. And I suppose to welcome you to lunch. Thank you.
Success. How do we measure that we're making an impact and we're making progress? What about the issue of research and development and the whole process of industrial development? How can we do that in a way that makes the process prosper and move forward? And what about the synergies of different types? The ones that we find in the private sector, the ones that we find in the business side, the ones that we find in entrepreneurship, all coming together to create those dynamics you need to move ahead. And what about the question of resources? You cannot innovate in a vacuum. You need resources to keep things going. And then importantly, a rather micro issue, but one of intellectual property. As you know, a lot of the ideas that you might be generating today might be lost if you don't think of how to protect your own intellectual property. So that's something very important. And lastly, as an economist, I also think that innovation and support to it requires a macroeconomic policy environment and a capable state, a state that knows what to do. There is no innovation that can take, well, there is probably, but it would be negative innovation in a case of chaos. So, having introduced the topic, I'm extremely delighted to have 4 panelists in front here. It's probably one of the best panels of today, maybe for the whole 50% ladies and 50% gentlemen. I'm going to introduce them to you. They all come with a very long and distinguished CV. I think if I did try to we would have to spend the whole day doing that, so I'm not going to try to do that. But let me very quickly introduce Mr. Franz Tavares. Okay, is that your name, sir? Yeah, Franz Tavares. What I want you to tell me is, I understand you're the president of something called ADEI. What is ADEI? Can you tell us very quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So ADEI is a government.
You're president.
Sure.
Yes, tell us what ADEI is only.
ADEI, it's the agency for.
I asked you because you came in before, just a little later. Where did you go to? Do you mind telling us where you went to school? I'm sure you have.
So I studied I have my degree from University of Algarve in Portugal, degree in management, and then
That responsibility and part of the claim to fame that Lagos as a city, the innovations that Lagos has achieved. She's also specially called the Innovation Lagos head. She heads that. So exactly all the innovations that take place there, she's responsible for. And she went to the University of Kent, where she read a degree in law, and subsequently also read development finance at the University of Reading in the UK. Anything else you want to say? Is that okay? Am I okay? All right. So now I'll go to a gentleman by the name of Ian John Creswell, who is the head of something called Lux Innovation, or Lux Innovation, or what is it?
It depends if you translate it in French or English. In English it's Lux Innovation, in French we say Lux Innovation.
Okay, wonderful. So he definitely is, it was created to do just that, innovate. And he heads it. He has a background in chemistry and also a background in industry. And right now he focuses on development issues, and he's extremely, of course, very happy to be here. Now let me switch to Dr. Malechela. Malechela. She has the most poetic name of all. I used to know a politician called Malechela. I don't know if it's your father. But anyway, so she is Director General of the National Institute for Medical Research in Tanzania, and she has degrees from the University of Dar es Salaam, and also a master's and a PhD, or Master of Science and PhD from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And she tells me that she is a specialist in parasitology. We argued here whether it was immunology. She says she's parasitology. So a very great panel, and they're all very welcome. And I don't want to add too much because we have lost quite a bit of time already. And so let me go straight to Franz, please, and you can start with your presentation. You want to stand there? Yeah. Why don't you come over? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steve. He's leading the panel. My colleagues, panelists, all the attendees in this panel. I'm not, unfortunately, I prepared the presentation in Portuguese, so with your permission, I will present in Portuguese. Anyway, during the exchange, I can switch to English whenever the need. Okay, since I have only 10 minutes, bom, vou começar a fazer uma apresentação que, sobretudo, pretende dar visibilidade a uma das iniciativas da agência que visam apoiar o desenvolvimento da inovação nas micro, pequenas e médias empresas em Cabo Verde. Esse foco nas micro, pequenas e médias empresas tem naturalmente a ver com o segmento-alvo que a agência trabalha, as micro, pequenas e médias empresas. Por isso, a apresentação vai ser muito contextualizada, atendendo à situação atual desse segmento. Mas vou fazer uma breve apresentação sobre a agência, algumas notas introdutórias para dizer que a Agência para o Desenvolvimento Empresarial e Inovação é uma agência criada pelo Estado de Cabo Verde, que de facto marca a nível do país a prioridade que, a nível de políticas públicas, a inovação começou a ser atribuída em Cabo Verde. Desde 2009, a agência foi criada com o objetivo principal de reforçar a competitividade das micro, pequenas e médias empresas em Cabo Verde, num quadro em que, pela nossa dimensão do país, essas empresas têm um papel extremamente relevante no contexto social. Hoje, após alguns anos de crescimento rápido na nossa economia, o segmento das micro, pequenas e médias empresas conseguiu mostrar uma forte capacidade para a criação de emprego e um impacto relevante no combate à pobreza e crescimento do setor empresarial em Cabo Verde. Portanto, todo o contexto naturalmente exige que as políticas públicas considerem essas empresas no centro das atenções de toda a política governativa. E naturalmente que um país com a nossa dimensão, com reduzidos recursos naturais, a questão de inovação vem também ocupar um lugar central na política pública. Eu mais à frente falarei muito brevemente sobre aquilo que nos dá a capacidade de perceber de facto a relevância que a inovação tem para o futuro de Cabo Verde. E uma terceira atribuição da agência tem a ver com ações de melhoria e intervenções de melhoria no ambiente de negócios, a qual a agência tem um papel relevante. Portanto, nós atuamos fundamentalmente em três pilares: o pilar do empreendedorismo, da promoção do empreendedorismo, resultado de um enorme esforço e dinâmica da agência e também de vários outros parceiros no país. Cabo Verde foi considerado Country of the Year e estamos com fortes expectativas devido ao aumento significativo de atividades de promoção do empreendedorismo em 2013, conseguir mais uma vez renovar ou ser reconhecido internacionalmente toda a nossa ação de promoção do empreendedorismo no país. E para além da vertente de promoção do empreendedorismo, a inovação e o desenvolvimento empresarial com intervenções diretas junto das empresas, tentando ultrapassar dificuldades e deficiências que as empresas têm e que penalizam a sua competitividade. E nesse domínio da inovação e desenvolvimento empresarial, nós temos 6 programas que pretendem, ao longo do ciclo de vida das empresas, dar uma resposta, uma assistência, um apoio efetivo às micro, pequenas e médias empresas. O programa CRIA, que é o programa desenhado para apoiar o desenvolvimento de ideias de negócio, o programa PME+, para empresas que estão em fase de desenvolvimento, que pretendem desenvolver novos produtos e serviços, o programa Acesso a Mercados, particularmente para aqueles setores de atividade que têm dificuldade de fazer aceder os seus produtos ou serviços para os grandes mercados consumidores. Em Cabo Verde, o mercado do turismo é um grande mercado que vai crescendo a taxas em torno de 10% a 15% ao ano, portanto um mercado muito acessível, particularmente ao setor do agronegócio e também a nossa indústria criativa. E o programa Acesso a Mercados trabalha fundamentalmente com esses dois setores. O programa Inovar, para apoiar o desenvolvimento de inovação nas empresas. O programa Renovar, naturalmente, num contexto em que nós estamos de menor crescimento económico, algumas empresas vão se mostrando com algumas dificuldades em continuar a fazer negócio. O programa Renovar vai-lhes dar um apoio para ajudar a se recuperarem. E o programa Academia das Micro Pequenas Empresas. Como eu vos disse atrás, portanto, nós olhamos para todo o ciclo de desenvolvimento das empresas e colocamos os nossos programas de desenvolvimento empresarial para dar resposta em cada fase do ciclo de desenvolvimento das empresas. Aqui faria uma menção uma ênfase muito especial ao programa, programa Academia das Micro e Pequenas Empresas, que acaba por ter uma intervenção ao longo de todo o ciclo de vida, porque ao longo da vida das empresas a necessidade de capacitação, de melhoria de capacidades, é sempre uma necessidade permanente. E também a inovação. E é mais uma vez aqui, por isso que nós colocamos aqui a inovação ao longo de todo o ciclo de vida das empresas como uma necessidade permanente. As empresas têm que inovar ao longo da sua vida, sempre. A inovação é um imperativo para as empresas, por isso aqui o nosso programa é desenhado para dar esse apoio. Portanto, o programa Inovar, no contexto de Cabo Verde, vem, de certa forma, a contribuir num cenário, de certa forma, adverso, onde vários estudos internacionais, como neste caso da Global Competitiveness Index, que mostram que ainda o país não conseguiu criar capacidades para a inovação, temos ainda alguma deficiência a nível de investigação e desenvolvimento, a investigação e desenvolvimento nas grandes empresas ainda é reduzida, mas em alguns fatores de inovação que conseguimos obter melhorias importantes, particularmente no que diz respeito ao reforço de capacidades dos nossos recursos humanos e também à penetração de tecnologias de informação e comunicação na administração pública, que tem sido um driver de produtividade e eficiência na administração pública. Portanto, o cenário, comparando relativamente a outros países que estão no mesmo estágio de desenvolvimento que Cabo Verde, verificamos que Cabo Verde ainda está em matéria de inovação ligeiramente abaixo dos seus comparáveis, mas também a nível da sofisticação de negócio, que pode ser estimulado ou melhorado com a inovação, também estamos num nível inferior, comparando com países que em matéria de competitividade nós podemos nos comparar. Claramente, um outro estudo da Global Innovation Index mostra onde é que está o nosso grande problema. Nós temos inputs para a inovação, recursos humanos, instituições, infraestruturas, mas por outro lado esses inputs da inovação não se refletem na produção de inovação. Portanto, a nível do output da inovação, estamos na posição 122 de 142 países a nível global. Centrando-se na questão da sofisticação das empresas, e aqui contextualizando sempre a nossa intervenção no apoio às empresas, na melhoria de produtividade, na penetração tecnológica, na melhoria de procedimentos, de processos nas empresas para melhorar a sua produtividade, uma intervenção muito relevante a nível da sofisticação dos negócios. E essa necessidade mostra-se claramente em alguns indicadores que dão uma fotografia muito clara da situação atual. Ainda temos uma produtividade abaixo domésticos como mercados internacionais. O acesso a tudo isto, nós acreditamos que a inovação, particularmente a inovação tecnológica, das tecnologias de informação e comunicação, poderão ter um impacto significativo na melhoria da produtividade e na colocação das empresas nacionais, de facto, num contexto melhor, a nível de condições de continuar a desenvolver ao ritmo que nós crescemos até agora, se não inovamos. Portanto, a inovação é uma questão de viver o modelo para Cabo Verde, de certa forma, olhando naturalmente com uma perspectiva positiva à minha afirmação. Tenho que avançar muito rápido no painelista. Esse programa que nós desenhamos para melhorar a inovação, para levar a inovação de produto e a utilização desse programa por parte das empresas vai acontecer efetivamente este ano. E na questão da inovação disponível hoje, temos desenvolvimento de soluções tecnológicas das empresas TICs em Cabo Verde, e há necessidade de inovar e melhorar processos nas empresas, é mobilizar depois capacidade, como eu frisei atrás, das empresas tecnológicas, de tecnologias de informação e comunicação, para implementar soluções tecnológicas já desenvolvidas no país, com vista ao desenvolvimento da inovação nas micro, pequenas e médias empresas. Esse levantamento foi feito, temos um conjunto de empresas que aqui citamos alguns, a Tabocis, a Portal Sábio, que é um site de e-commerce, a Mitel, a MGO, as indie developers com produtos Android e iOS, InfoSolution, IS1, portanto um conjunto de empresas em Cabo Verde que vão produzindo inovação e vão se posicionando com produtos inovadores que podem ser de facto importantes para apoiar o desenvolvimento das micro e pequenas empresas em Cabo Verde. Muito obrigado.
I work in the governor's office in Lagos State as a deputy chief of staff and also coordinate the Innovate Lagos project. What is the Innovate Lagos project? Basically, sorry, I'm missing up there. Basically, it's an initiative of the Lagos State government to create a sustainable innovation ecosystem across all sectors in Lagos. Our vision is to build an African innovation hub that drives social and economic development. Our guiding principles cover inclusivity. So basically, we feel that innovation is happening in all sectors, across all classes. So you have informal sector innovation, formal sector innovation. It cuts across all age groups. There's innovation happening with young people, with older people also innovating as well. We also look at creativity. A key focus is also job creation in our aims. We focus very much on solutions. So we just don't innovate. We're looking for innovations that solve problems, which is critical for us. Collaboration and networks are critical aspect for us. Enterprise, commercialization, and looking at innovation as the whole innovation ecosystem in Lagos. The tools we're looking to use to promote innovation in Lagos is technology, infrastructure, policies and incentives, education and capacity development, competitions in tertiary institutions, in secondary schools, in primary schools, research, spaces for innovation. That's critical because we believe that it's when you bring people together, when people tend to gather together, that's where you get a lot of innovation coming out of, and that also helps in terms of networking innovators. We also look at funding, partnerships between the public and private sector, and also events around innovation. Why position Lagos as Africa's innovation hub? Well, it's the largest market in Africa, a population of 21 million. Where would you find that on a subnational level in Africa? It's a commercial hub of West Africa, of course, commercial hub of Nigeria. 60% of Nigeria's commercial activities happen in Lagos. The gateway to the west coast of Africa, largest stock exchange in West Africa. You have a large pool of talented young people, from about 60% of the population in Lagos. We have roughly about 6 hubs at the moment. We have, that's in sort of innovation centers. We have Co-Creation Hub, which is a group of young people that came together to establish sort of a hub to develop and tech apps and all that. We also have the Innovation Hub. We also have another hub called IDRNG, which was set up actually by the federal government in Lagos. We have 16 tertiary institutions within Lagos, seaports, 2 seaports, and 8% of Nigerian seaport activities. We're currently developing an intermodal transport system. We have the BRT line running within Lagos. Now we're developing sort of West Africa's first monorail project, which will support the transportation system. Ferry system, extensive development around there. There's also been massive infrastructure renewal within the state in the past 7 or so years with the new administration. It's an economy primarily driven by public-private partnerships. We believe that government can't do it alone. So even with this project, it's literally, we work with the private sector to actually drive innovation within Lagos and all our other projects. GDP, over 70 billion at the moment, contributes 36% of Nigeria's non-oil GDP and home to 80% of Nigeria's technology industry. Objectives of Innovate Lagos project. We're looking to develop an economic and business climate that rewards innovation. We believe that, we as government, we sit there and we realize that, innovation is important to the economy. So we've literally opened ourselves up to the Lagos, to citizens in Lagos, saying that, something, government is here to support innovation. We're here to also reward innovation. So that's literally been the message we tried to send out in the past 2-3 years since the project started. We're developing and supporting initiatives that take innovative ideas to market. We're developing enabling legislation and policies for innovation, developing human, physical, and technological resources for innovation, creating strong networks to facilitate the flow of ideas, expertise, and so on. And of course, developing policies and incentives to also encourage private sector investment in innovation and R&D. We're also looking to invest in research and innovation via grants, equity funding, and match funding. So the institutional framework for Innovate Lagos. Basically, you have three bodies under the Innovate Lagos project. You have the Lagos Innovation Advisory Council that basically looks to provide policy guidance for innovation across all sectors in Lagos. So we're not restricting ourselves to technology or agriculture or whatever. We're saying we're open to innovation across all sectors. It's literally a 19-member council made of government and private sector officials, and it was established by the governor in August 2011. And then we also have the Lagos Research and Development Council, which is a 10-member council inaugurated in August 2012. And their role is basically to strengthen and promote R&D tertiary institutions in Lagos. When we have the Innovate Lagos State Secretariat, which is the administrative arm of Innovate Lagos. And we run a very lean organization, literally about a team of about 4 or 5 people, running the project as a whole in terms of the implementation of projects. So under the Lagos Innovation Council projects, we in 2012 we partnered with one of the innovation hubs called Co-Creation Hub to begin to look at mapping innovation across Lagos. So basically, we have this, actually, I wish I could actually show you the link on the website, but maybe I'll do that later. It's lagosinnovation.com. So basically, people can go in there and begin to, if you're a business within any area in Lagos, you can go in and begin to plot, where your location is within Lagos. As we continue to gather this data online, what happens is that it would now feed into the innovation policy we're working on for Lagos State. So basically, it also provides, it's also looking to promote deliberate economic development around Lagos State in the areas of competitive advantage from a thorough understanding of the microeconomic business environment within which companies exist and compete. We also have a project under the Innovation Council called the IHQ Yaba. Now that falls under our infrastructure projects, looking to help to strengthen innovation within Lagos. That again, we're collaborating with a telecoms company called Main One Cable, and once again, Co-Creation Hub for the installation of fiber optic cables around a location coming up in Lagos. It's being sort of referred to as Silicon Valley. It's Yaba. I don't know who's been to Lagos and who knows where Yaba is. It's where you have the young tech companies coming up, and it is developing into a fairly interesting, zone for technology innovation. So what the government did was to work with Main One to basically provide exemption on fees for right-of-way and literally infrastructure levies. So government saying, something, you don't have to pay anything, just go and lay the cables, but you must guarantee that you're going to connect all the public institutions to the schools. We have roughly about 16 schools, public schools within that area. We have 2 tertiary institutions within that area. We have the Yaba School of Technology. We have the University of Lagos, which is one of Nigeria's prime tertiary institutions. And then we have about 5 healthcare facilities sort of within that area. So basically, once you can guarantee that you can connect all those institutions and provide free Wi-Fi, then you can go ahead and then we exempt. So basically, the fiber cable, the optic cables have been laid at the moment. So now we're looking at the next layer in terms of actually connecting it to the institutions within that zone. It's a test pilot that will also feed into our broadband policy, which we are currently developing with the private sector. Other Innovation Council projects include our Made in Lagos project. We're very proud of stuff that we make in Lagos, even though it's still all work in progress. We support a lot of young innovators and makers through grants for prototyping, testing and scaling. So I know scaling is a critical issue when it comes to innovation. Business support and mentoring innovators. That's an area we support. We're also looking at the Nollywood upgrade, so the Nollywood industry, which has become quite a big industry, film industry in Africa and Nigeria. We're currently providing institutional support via grants, capacity development, and improving distribution within that industry. and then also a capacity development integration project, which is linking industry, which is an industry-linked training program for tertiary institutions. So we realized that, you know something?
Because we often think of them in terms of bricks and mortar. And I actually want to change your opinion as to the value of such initiatives, not in terms of bricks and mortar, but in terms of the content and the human spirit that it generates. I think a very interesting starting point is Lundvall's work on systems of innovation describes them as systems of interactive learning. And I hope today that we will have that spirit here. So these particular institutions can be called intermediaries or knowledge brokers. And that is a very important part of an innovation system. This morning already we've heard an analysis of many of the innovation systems in Africa are measured in terms of the components that are part of it, the famous triple helix, etc. But what tends to be ignored is the fact that those components are silos and fragmented. And as long as they stay that way, then it's fallacious to talk about a system of innovation. So, let me try to paint these types of institutions in that context. And then from a personal experience, as I say, having actually started one of these institutions from a blank sheet of paper, you learn quite a lot, probably by doing and by mistakes, but you learn a lot. And also the fact that institutions of this nature have evolved, and that's something where I actually want to start. If I can. Of land next to Stanford, which in fact became Stanford Science Park and subsequently rolled out to the famous Silicon Valley. A totally unique set of circumstances, a university that in fact was very closely aligned with the fact that they were trying to put their science and research, what we call science and technology parks, innovation hub, can be traced over a 60-year period. If you now translate that to Africa, it's been done. So I think it's fair to assume, even now, the involvement of Africa in this whole movement is probably, you can count them on one hand. Some serious questions about how we've actually built this into our systems of innovation. And why should we? What are the advantages? I think now we're starting to see some hubs which are showing real promise. We hear about the iHub in Kenya. We talk about parks in Egypt. There are parks in Southern Africa. The land was sold off to anybody who wanted to be there. There was no activity, and that park cannot be regarded in this context. So there are more examples of failed initiatives than successful ones. Again, what have we learned from this, and why do we keep perhaps repeating the same document, the Consolidated Plan of Action for Science and Technology in Africa, written in 2006. It had a specific program called Promote the Creation of Technology Parks. 7 years on, as the first meeting ever taken, we had take place value on considering. We also have, I think, a habit of mimicry. We heard this morning at the plenary, innovation is a much broader subject than STI. And so how do we actually link these two events? STI tends to promote the concept that sort of R&D is the dominant force in innovation. Two concepts that I don't think as a continent we've really got our heads around. Often we celebrate invention and then somehow it's interpreted as innovation, which means it's benefited society for that. And then I think many of the initiatives that have been taken around the continent, some of which haven't succeeded, were based solidly on this paradigm. So I'm actually challenged when they set up. And the first one is, in many cases, they are government institutions. They might even be private. They have a strong environment which looks at elements like stimulating collaboration. A wonderful word, co-creation. Somebody mentioned the Apple iPhone, that a lot of it was putting together the ideas from many people. That's co-creation. Vital, networking. Starting an emerging company is a lonely game. Mutual facilitation, and there we come back to one of the significant roles of a hub like this. What the hub does is it can create connections between people who perhaps have low levels of trust and need somebody to pull them together to have a constructive discussion. There are very few institutions that support these kind of activities. Access to markets, access to funding, market visibility locally and internationally, connecting people to each other. It obviously helps if you have good ICT and some meeting spaces. But the type of people we're talking to often lack business experience, especially if they are technologists. They need mentorship. The ideas of pre-incubation and incubation. If they're starting companies, do they understand company law, governance, people management, things like this? Those are success factors in successful emerging businesses. Where do they get help? I think often we start with the first world ambition of saying the solutions must be global. But there's no doubt that the successful companies tend to say a real test market, unless you are really in disruptive technologies or disruptive processes, your local market is your test bed. So you have to actually have the relationships with the test bed. And around the policies, when you contemplate projects like this, I think the answer is it's all about people. It's not about the real estate. The real estate often will take 6, 7, 10 years from concept to delivery. And during that time, if you do nothing around these topics, you've wasted a decade. And if you analyze many of the projects, that's exactly what happens. They sit for 10 years with civil engineers and architects and so on, designing something which will solve everything in their minds, and in reality the entire community that needs it has nothing for them. So I think the answer is, it's all about, when you set up an institution like that, choose the right people with passion for innovation and able to build value-adding services to the very community that you're trying to serve. That's just my byline. I think we need to up our game. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neville.
I think it's quite nice to have started with a series of lessons and provocations before we now look. I think Erica will present some of the actual cases. I hope nobody is depressed who was planning to start construction tomorrow. That is not the intention. I think what we want to do is to interrogate the concept and see how we can do these things better. Up our game. Erica?
Innovation hubs. I use the inverted commas because, as Neville said, what is an innovation hub? We call them innovation hubs, innovation clusters, science parks, incubators. They've received a number of terms, and we're not entirely sure what sort of animal are we looking at. So I put the inverted commas to sort of fit all of those into that. We looked at 5 Southern African countries. We didn't collect all the incubators or innovation hubs, obviously, in the 5 countries, but we covered Namibia, Botswana, Mozambique, South Africa, and Gambia, and Zambia. So we have examples from these 5 countries. And what I'm going to present here is a little bit of an overview. I'm not going to go into detail about each one of them and a detailed assessment about what they're doing, but rather to give a flavor and maybe more the idea that there are different modalities, there are different ways of doing this. All of them have challenges and all of them have advantages, and it's important to learn from those lessons to really try and tailor it to the needs. So basically, just as a background, it's not news for any of us, but economies in the region, they are highly reliant on the export of natural resources, which tends to result in a concentration of production and limiting the possibilities of employment. So understanding this and the role of small and medium enterprises in diversification, employment creation, and innovation. Southern African countries have responded to the global trends to be more competitive and to diversify. And this has driven the emergence of many different types of innovation hubs, as I said, and we need to learn and tailor them to the specific needs. These are very broad classification. It's a very broad classification that we devised in our paper. But basically, utilities and attract high-tech sectors, they require high capital investment. I will go into the details in the next slides. But we try to find examples of the 3 of the traditional science parks, what we call activity-based innovation centers, and they also mentioned by Neville, the 3rd generation co-creation model. As I mentioned, we collected some evidence for 9 of them: the Science and Technology Park in Mozambique, the Botswana Innovation Hub, the Innovation Hub that sits in Pretoria in South Africa, BUT Science and Technology Park in South Africa, the Namibia Business Innovation Center, the EMLA in South Africa as well as the Barnwood Barn in Cape Town, and Bongo Hive in Zambia, and the Fringe in Cape Town, South Africa. As you can see, I tried to fit each one of them close to the model that they resemble more, but it's very, as I mentioned, some of them sit in between, and it's very difficult to sort of set clear categories for them, but just to give a flavor. So the first mode, the traditional science parks, I think it would respond a bit to the typical stereotype idea that we have how science park looks like. It's basically emphasizing building new infrastructure. A lot of efforts are put in design and implementation, and as mentioned, it tends to promote the establishment or attract, in fact, high-tech knowledge-based companies. And as Neville mentioned also, they tend to be government
government-driven and funded. They have a number of advantages. And the reputational effects are very large. It gives a very good image to the country in the sense of high-tech, knowledge-based economy is happening in this country, and it's very interesting in terms of attracting FDI. And they're easily aligned, because they're government-driven, they're easily aligned with regional and national policy strategies. So they give that sense of consistency and coherence in terms of policy strategy, policy implementation. And they nurture competitiveness in a community of those leading high-tech companies that could have a potential spillover effect that can be discussed, and also attract FDI. Another advantage is because they are government-driven, they usually struggle, not necessarily always, but they usually struggle a bit less with financial sustainability. So funding is at least ensured for a set period of time. I realize that the screen doesn't show all the challenges, but because they tend to build massive monuments, as they've been described, they take a long time to build, and it takes a very long time to take off. You can see periods of construction that go on to 10 years, an average of 10 years. And they are very complex, and they usually require a lot of services from abroad, stop and continuing situations where there's disruption of the construction process. And once they're built, in many cases there's a difficulty in finding the appropriate tenants. Who is going to populate this building? So depending on many different factors, such as the location and how well thought it was design the process in terms of the industrial demand or the business demand, there may be difficulty in finding tenants, and we found that evidence in the case studies that we looked at. Because they take so much capital, and because they take such a long time to build and take off, they're usually quite rigid there's rigidity as opposed to flexibility in the objectives and activities that are designed. It's a long time to take off, so it's very difficult to change the direction of the traditional science parks. Now, the second mode is what we call the activity-based hubs. These type of activity-based hubs, they have a little bit less emphasis on the infrastructure, but instead the access to the infrastructure or to the facilities is more important. So the location is critical. I'll give you an example of the Bandhoek Barn, for instance, that is located right in the center of Cape Town. In some buildings that already existed, they were located there because the demand was around them. So that is what is key in the activity-based hubs, rather than developing a new facility. And they're focused more in the value-added services. So you would see activity-based hubs offering a range of services to companies, such as mentoring, coaching, intellectual property support. We can discuss them later. It's basically designed to promote entrepreneurship, not necessarily in high-tech or in knowledge-based industries, but it's more about identifying entrepreneurs and support entrepreneurship in many different sectors. In many cases, activity-based hubs don't have necessarily a sectoral orientation, although in other cases they do. As opposed to the traditional science parks, the activity-based hubs are much more diverse. They look very different among them, and they have a broad range of origins, and they usually emerge as a response from a community of practice. We can see it in the case of Bongo Hive in Zambia, where there is IT practitioners and IT graduates starting and driving this initiative and finding strategic partnerships to take it forward. In the Bandhoek Barn again, you see the IT community in Cape Town. The IT industry was a business response to business needs to was basically trying to find a way of reducing costs and improving the market access by working together. So it very much strengthens the role of cooperation and collaboration amongst businesses, because it responds to a very specific and explicit business need. The advantages, as I mentioned, they respond to an existing need, and there's emphasis on business cooperation. The challenges usually is that financial sustainability becomes a problem at a certain point, so they have to be very clever in terms of using and leveraging strategic partnerships with large local, domestic or international companies to ensure the funding, and in cases occasionally they struggle to find the support from government as opposed to the traditional science firms. The third mode, which I find perhaps the most interesting to discuss at this point, is the co-creation hubs. The co-creation hubs, they're sort of conceptualized in a different way. They respond to a broader set of goals. For instance, I'll give you, in our paper we discussed with an initiative called the Fringe, that is in Cape Town. It was conceptualized by a range of stakeholders. It's not even industry now, it's a range of stakeholders. And they see the potentials of establishing a hub in an area. And it usually comes with an intention of finding solutions to both social, economic, and even environmental challenges, such as pollution or transport or a number of different areas. It's very much territorially relevant. The territory matters in this kind of activity. So they tend to look at the district and how do we create an innovation district in which different stakeholders, including the community, marginalized communities, informal settlements, the industrial sector, the educational training organizations, all can contribute into creating solutions to existing challenges. So innovation is both for societal and for commercial purposes in this conceptualization. The good thing about it is that it usually builds on something that exists already. So it tries to create synergies amongst a variety of stakeholders. So they build on the fact that there's already a fashion or a hub in the area, or there's already a creative industry sort of initiative going on. And they try to connect all of these initiatives together and develop a co-creation hub by adding on a number of value-added services. They're usually, the interesting thing is that there are environments that allow for failure. So there's an openness to risk in these co-creation hubs. And they build on rather than on the hard technology, R&D part of innovation, they sort of focus more on the soft aspects. And because of the nature, the acceptance of change and the different stakeholders that play a role in the co-creation hubs, it's easier to change the objectives and the purpose of the activities. It's more flexible as compared to the rigidity of building an university. What are the challenges? We're managing the interest of all these people, business, informal settlements, local government, and so on. It's extremely difficult. So managing all of these expectations and interests from all stakeholders is one of the key challenges that we found. And again, selling it to government and trying to raise funds to sustain it is also challenging. So just to conclude, a few lessons, and I think I will emphasize perhaps what Neville already has said in his presentation. Each of these modalities respond to an underlying conceptualization and understanding of how innovation happens. So they reflect very much an idea of what matters in terms of developing new products, new services, new solutions. So it's very important to not to ignore the concept that is underlying each of these initiatives. It is important to know, and I will stress it again, that you can't take one of these models and transfer it completely to another place. It has to be tailored to each country, to each province, to each city, depending on what territory matters in this case. Experimentation and piloting have proven to be critical in the cases that we looked at. It's very important to start small and see if it works. And physical infrastructure can be important, but you can't get away without it at the beginning. It can come later. As I'm repeating what Neville said to me once, you can get very far with a coat of paint in an existing building, and then if it's needed, you will go to the next level. And in many cases, you get good ideas about what business needs and what stakeholder needs, and how innovation can take place. But there is a sense of paralysis because there's no funding. We don't have funding. We can't do anything. You hear that in many cases. But the argument is that if you find the right strategic partners and you get strategic support, if you're clever about who you partner with, you can get very far with very little money, as long as you have the right partners. So it's a matter of thinking strategically about cooperation and partnership. I think so far this is all. I hope more points will come out in the discussion. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica. Perhaps I'll ask the two of you, can relocate here, I can figure out, Thank you very much. I think what we've heard now is the importance both of concept but also context in how we think about science. Make a point, you can emphasize, give an idea, give a solution, but you cannot make a speech. You are not a journalist. So we'll take now around maybe a few questions at a time, maybe 2 or 3. Feel free to comment, but be brief so we can take as many as possible. I see one here, I see one there, and one there. We take those 4 first, we'll take another round.
Thank you very much, Giache. My name is Paulino Dias. I'm the president of...
The type of the model that was adopted by the different parks that were established related to the scale of innovation activity going on. Is there any linkage or relationship between the scale of the activity of innovation going on and the type of model that is adopted in a particular case? And secondly, I wanted to find out the spin-offs, the level of activity that is related to each kind of model that was being practiced. Is there a linkage between the model and the level of activity and the level of outputs and outcomes in terms of the spin-offs that emerge from the 3 different models that were discussed? Thank you.
Strengths and weaknesses of the province, if you like. And the province in itself is unique in South Africa. It is something like 38% of the economy of South Africa, and I think at that time it was 10% of the economy of Africa. So it was not a, let's call it a normal African region. It had some uniqueness. And I think some of the lessons learned is exactly what we've said. You need to understand very, very deeply what the need is for what you're trying to build. And you know, the tendency, unfortunately, is to follow the first path, which says, let's build something because it will attract everybody. And the problem you have, and the problem certainly I had, was when you built it and people don't come, your focus gets taken away from the value-adding services to the tenants and focused on your personal survival and sustainability, because you now own real estate. And for anybody who's owned a large site with large real estate which is empty, people see that as your first priority because you're basically eating money. So I think the scaling of the item is very important. What is the need? How many, you know, if you want to support entrepreneurs, how many entrepreneurs are there? Are there 10? You know, when you've got all 10, the process stops, but you built for 100. So I think the studies and the thinking that needs to go, markets, your industrial policies. You know, if tourism, for example, is a major focus, then how could the park serve the improvement of tourism in your country. So what are the industrial focus areas? How does that link to the park? Is it aimed at entrepreneurs? Is it aimed for some other initiative of government? I think all these things have to be taken into account. And in a sense, the facility you build has got to match with the need. The facility on a greenfield site will probably, even when government is in control of it, will probably take 5 to 6 years. The image of that park, I think, is related to how much it can achieve much quicker with the community you're trying to serve. In other words, if you sell it as the solution to local entrepreneurs, but you say to them, you're just going to have to wait 6 years. Anybody who knows entrepreneurs, when 6 years come, they've lost interest in you and done it anyway. They've done their own. So again, it's that balance and choosing the model. And I think, in fact, you can have a phased development where you move from one. I think your third generation co-creation would move into your value addition offerings, would move into your physical structure. And so in fact, I think the modern theory is all three models are phases of development. But my personal feeling is I wouldn't start with the traditional park first. I would do the others first. Simply because your focus, you're going to put the dominant emphasis on finding which activities work for you. And as we said, there's no silver bullet. We can't predict from our experience what will work in your country. You have to determine that, and it has to be highly interactive. If you like, the clients of an innovation hub are the greatest source of information. So trust, that's why I said you choose the right people to operate it. They must generate trust in the community, so feedback is open and honest, and that way the whole thing moves forward. So I think that's probably, I don't know if it does answer the questions, but I hope it helps a little.
Okay, then I think we had a few questions which have of innovation, and if there's any relationship between the model chosen, the modality chosen, and the scale of innovation. The first question that came to my mind is what do you call the scale of innovation? Are we talking about the number of creative startups that come out of the initiative? Are we talking about sales or exports of innovative products and services? Because those are different indicators of success or scale of innovation. Interestingly, the activity-based, one of the activity-based indicators, in the traditional science parks, as far as I know, we didn't find any indicators of scale of innovation. In fact, the indicators are quite limited in terms of the information they provide about the success of the science parks. The success is mainly measured in terms of inputs and expenditure. So when we look at the outputs in terms of scale of innovation, we find very little. Interesting enough, mode 2 and 3 tend to be much more aware of the need of measuring outputs. For instance, I'll give you the example of the bandwidth band that I have top of my head. That the tenants they had collected the data that tenants had 2.5 more chances to survive because of because being part of this initiative. And in interviews with the tenants, in their perception, they stated that they perceived that they had 80% more chances of succeeding if they were part. 80% of their success was ascribed to being part of this initiative. We didn't find any of those indicators in the traditional science parks. So it's very hard to compare. It comes down to measurements and the need to have comparable indicators to be able to answer your question.
I just wanted to add to that. I think most of these initiatives would also be linked to the concept of incubation. And I think one of the most powerful initiatives, and I think Africa would benefit greatly from it, is what we call pre-incubation. There's nothing worse than somebody giving up their job to start a company where there is no hope of it succeeding. Because often people need to retain what they're doing and be able to go to an agency and get critiqued on their ideas in a very open and trusting manner to say, you know, does this business model make sense? Is that product have attraction in the marketplace? Have you done market surveys? Do you know how the business will run? Who will manufacture? All of these questions can be answered in advance of a company being formed. And so I think part of the failure rate is dependent on the value of a pre-incubation type model. At the Innovation Hub, when I was there, our incubator graduated about 70% of the companies. Graduation means they stand on their own feet, they move out of the mentorship scheme, and you know, and in fact I can say 15 years later, I think the majority of those companies are still working, they're still going. So it's very much a case of, I think, the filter is a positive filter. It's not meant to be judgmental. It's meant to assist people to come up with a business plan, a business strategy that can work. And that's different from taking a business plan to a bank and saying, lend me some money, and they simply say your plan is not worth any money. That doesn't help you to fix the plan. So these organizations, and I think that's where the value addition, I think any traditional park must have a very strong element of the added value. Those two must go together. Otherwise, you've built a business park. So I don't think the middle one is negotiable. That is fundamental. The two extremes are sort of the style that goes with the application of that.
Okay. There was, I think, an important, a very rich question around what would work in my country, according to size, according to the concentration issue that you mentioned now. And I think that small states have an advantage in terms of managing the innovation system, because a small intervention can make a major change in the socioeconomic reality of the entire population. So that has to be seen as an advantage. That's the first comment. But the second comment is that in a small state as well as in a larger one, I think the shape of the innovation system and how it should look like must respond directly to a very detailed process of evidence collection through a participatory process, a consultation with all stakeholders. Nobody can come from outside and tell you how the innovation system in Cape Verde must look like, because it must respond to a consultation process that has to happen internally. And out of identifying these needs and articulating the demands from different stakeholders, you will be able to build an innovation system that responds to that. But I think that applies to any country. There has to be a very specific and explicit efforts to go through that process of consultation.
I'm going to answer that. Just a comment on that, to be sharing war stories about this subject. Because things are customized, I think we can learn so much from each other in terms of under what circumstances certain things work and certain things don't. So I think the idea of a conversation of people who are involved with this would add great value to the whole debate, because as we said, these processes are evolving, they are not static. And therefore, if you're not able to kind of stay abreast of the successful thinking and sharing it, because none of these parks are really in competition, or these hubs. They're not competitive. The regions will respond to them, and therefore the learning can be shared, and you're not creating anything that's going to be negative on the other players. just the comment on hubs and clusters. I think, as I said, the biggest thing about clusters is that certainly the literature and the studies on it seem to indicate you need a core to a cluster for it to be successful. You've got to have activities which can be enhanced by bringing other players to the party. But a government starting a cluster, I think, is a process which is destined to have some serious problems. You know, and that core, if you're talking innovation, that core is preferably active businesses who can be enhanced through connections with research and other activities. But if you don't have that core, I think you're in that kind of linear model. The research is going to do wonderful things, but there's no output mechanism. So I don't know if that helps you.
Thank you. Oh, so you want to add something?
Okay. And I think it's a critical bit of information that we need to know in terms of, I mean, for the long-term institutional learning and policy learning. This kind of information needs to exist, but it's hardly ever collected, if never.
Great. Okay, we'll take another round. I've got one question here and two.
It's managed by, government-driven. Does it mean they are created by the government actually? And the other part of the question is,
time is hard, and I would like to ask you how the role of the international cooperation is in Africa. Because I'm saying this, I'm asking this because sometimes it's hard to start, and it's hard to conceptualize the model, business model. And as far as we are talking about in the continent, and as know the role of the government is very strong, how do you see this in the near future in the continent? The second one, in your experience, how the chain value play a role in the building the business model in the parks and in the classes? Thank you very much.
And then
and specifically, just going back to what Neville asked, that most successful innovations in Africa come up from a commercial point of view or from entrepreneurs. So how do you balance, how do they manage the IP issue and then the need for sustainability and entrepreneurship in that kind of context? Thank you.
Very high. And the risk is also quite high. So that you find that especially in countries where there are many of these initiatives, private sector will often, if you go to the UK, around Cambridge, there are many science parks. It's quite difficult to get a real estate person truly interested, especially as most of these parks have entry criteria. So you actually say certain people cannot come and live there. And therefore you're limiting the market, and private sector is not terribly in favor of having an empty building, but you say the people they bring cannot go there. So I think they are often funded by government. The dilemma you face is a different question, which is the role of government. And I think that is a very tricky question as to the style of management of the park, because I think the park must appeal to the community who are going to live there. And therefore, often they want a more entrepreneurial environment than perhaps you get with a government structure. And so I think that is the governance aspect is one. And I think when you read our case study, you'll see that I used to have hair. That was a creation which created many, many problems, was finding the right mode of governance and who would be responsible for the board structures and so on, and whether they had the right balance. So I think that is a decision when, if you do build a more traditional centralized park, I would say look very carefully at the governance, the balance, so that the future beneficiaries of it feel that this in fact is supportive of them. Now that will vary from country to country depending on the relationship of government and business. In some countries that relationship is quite adversarial, and therefore a park built by government can be seen not very positively. So again, it will be country dependent, but it's an issue right up front. Don't delay it until you are far down the track. In terms of international companies, I think you've got to look very carefully at what value are the international companies bringing to you. We had a phrase which was, we are very careful of what we call brown box movers. It really doesn't help to have an international company there who is simply using you as a warehouse. And they are just marketing their products because they are associated with your innovation hub without contributing anything to the activity. There is a huge market and in fact is coming up with novelty. And companies would like to get access to that novelty, and you have to manage that process. So I think, you know, all of us would be thrilled when a big company comes along and says, I want to be part of your park. And it's very tough when you have to ask them why, because you don't want to chase them away. So it's a gentle negotiation, but I think if they are simply brown box movers, I would say there's a better location. They have to be a contributor. If they contribute, they can be hugely positive. And the value chain, I think that's a very important one. You saw that one comment where I said these are linking organizations. Many of the emerging companies desperately need links to the market, links to customers. They need an image. A smaller company battles to create an image. Your hub creates an image for the participants. And so the market access is one of the items which the management of such a hub should look at. How do you connect your innovators or your inventors in some cases with potential markets and clients, be they local or international? So that you'll find, and you'll look at projects like the Bandwidth Barn, they have a tremendous international reputation now of linking their companies globally. And they have a track record of it. So global players look at the companies there because that looks like a source of attraction. So these things have to build. But I think not creating the value chain, but facilitating a value chain is very important. And I think that's got to be on the agenda of the management of those hubs.
Yes, just to add a little bit on your point about emphasizing the value chain and how they have to be really embedded in the design of these activities. You mentioned the value chain as something that reaches out to the international spheres, but in many cases, in other cases, the value chains can be rather local, and in many cases, 50 kilometers around. So looking at the value chain doesn't mean that you have to go necessarily up to the multinational level or international suppliers and so on. It can be rather local. So it's really understanding the extent and the territorial aspect of the value chain. There was a question that was made about, sorry? Yes, the question from Algeria. I think the comment about the indicators that are used in the cases and how to measure outputs in terms of patents and so on, and how relevant that is in different contexts. I agree with you that we are very far away from getting the adequate information that informs what the outcomes and the outputs is, and the use of patents, as we know, responds to a conceptualization of innovation that doesn't necessarily fit into any of the more 2 or 3 that we explained here. developing adequate output and outcome innovations of these activities is critical, and moving beyond the usual patent measurements. But in terms and in connection with that, the role of IP in co-creation, I think it's a very important question that you raised in there. Usually, these activities are promoting the open exchange of knowledge and sharing, learning from each other. That works up to a certain stage where innovations emerge, practical innovations, and especially when you are in situations where you're bringing in universities, industry, with marginalized communities, with the people that are in disadvantage in terms of knowing how the system works, or what knowledge appropriation mechanisms are relevant for them or are on their interest. I think in these initiatives, that's why the range of stakeholders that must be part of them and that are part of them includes organizations that oversee these issues and ensure that even if they are very complicated, IP arrangements are in place to make sure that everybody's interests are protected. And I mean, you can go to their website and you can see the range of innovations that have come up of the print in particular, and you will see that there is an element of IP that is clearly acknowledged and taken care of. Especially because they in particular, the print works with design issues, design and informatics. So the issue of IP in design, as we know, is critical. So I think that's a very good question and it needs to be carefully considered.